In a quiet corner of the galaxy, far from the busy trade routes and flashing war zones, a small signal appeared on a long-range scanner. It was faint, distant, and easy to ignore. The technicians at the Galactic Coalition's observation station almost did ignore it. They had seen thousands of strange signals before. Most were debris, old satellites, or smugglers trying to stay hidden. But this one was different. It moved with purpose in formation like a fleet. Inside the station, officers leaned over glowing screens. They saw a cluster of ships, small and slow, heading straight toward Coalition space. Their design was odd, boxy, unpolished, and compact. Not like the sleek curves of Coalition cruisers. One officer laughed, saying it looked like something pulled from an ancient museum. The others joined in, joking that maybe some forgotten miners had decided to play explorers. To them, the fleet was no threat. Just a curiosity. But one younger officer didn't laugh. He watched the readings carefully, noticing details others missed. The energy signature of those ships wasn't random. It was controlled, steady, almost too perfect. Their power cores were compact but extremely stable, showing none of the fluctuations common in older engines. He pointed it out, but the senior commander waved him off. "A handful of old ships won't bother us," the commander said with a smirk. "They'll turn around once they see a patrol vessel." The young officer didn't argue, but a quiet feeling of unease settled in his chest. Something about the fleet didn't feel right. Over the next few hours, the mysterious formation kept moving closer. The station's AI tried to identify it through pattern databases, pirate factions, rogue traders, independent explorers, but there was no match. The hull markings didn't match any known species or manufacturer. Even the communication frequencies were unknown. It was as if the fleet didn't belong to this part of the galaxy at all. The Coalition's command center received the report and decided to send a patrol squadron, 3 cruisers and a small escort wing to check things out. It was supposed to be a routine interception. Nothing serious. The officers in charge laughed that they'd be home before dinner. When the patrol fleet arrived near the border zone, they spotted the unknown ships immediately. They were small, maybe a dozen in total, moving in a tight formation. Their hulls were dark gray, built for function, not beauty. No visible insignia except a small blue symbol on the side of the lead ship. The Coalition Admiral ordered a standard greeting to be broadcast. "Unidentified vessels, this is the Galactic Coalition. You are entering controlled space. Identify yourselves or prepare to be boarded." No response. The translator system caught a faint transmission, but it was too scrambled to decode. The Admiral frowned and ordered another hail. Again, silence. The ships continued moving forward. A few seconds later, a single burst of encrypted data was received, but no one could make sense of it. The Admiral grew impatient. "Maybe they don't even have a translator," he muttered. "Fire a warning shot. Let's see if that gets their attention." A pulse beam shot across the void, passing harmlessly in front of the strange ships. Still no reaction. The fleet didn't even slow down. The Admiral ordered another shot, closer this time. The beam struck near the lead vessel, making the entire patrol fleet's display screens flicker with static for a brief moment. Then everything went quiet. The next instant, one of the unknown ships moved. It didn't turn or drift. It vanished from its spot and reappeared thousands of meters closer, moving with blinding precision. Before anyone could react, a flash of light cut through space, striking the lead Coalition cruiser. Alarms screamed. Power failed. The massive ship, 3 times larger than its attacker, went completely dark. The Admiral shouted for evasive action, but it was too late. The shot hadn't destroyed the cruiser. It had disabled it, shutting down every system without causing an explosion. It was surgical, controlled. The rest of the unknown ships stayed where they were, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. Panic spread through the Coalition bridge. "What kind of weapon was that?" someone shouted. "It wasn't plasma or ion. It's something else." The young officer from earlier, now monitoring remotely from the observation station, stared at his readings in disbelief. The energy spikes from that attack were incredibly concentrated yet clean, like a miniature star compressed into a beam. He had never seen technology like that. Then suddenly the scrambled transmission came through again, but this time the translator finally managed to decode a portion of it. The voice that came through was calm, steady, and unmistakably human. "This is the United Earth Defense Command. "You have fired upon human vessels. Stand down immediately." For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Every officer froze. The Admiral's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Did that say Earth?" he whispered. The word carried weight. Legends from old archives mentioned humans, an ancient species that once joined the early Galactic Council before vanishing after the Collapse Wars. Some said they were wiped out by their own weapons. Others believed they had fled into deep space, never to return. For centuries, humanity was considered a myth, a footnote in forgotten history books. The Admiral shook his head, refusing to believe it. This must be a trick, a pirate group using old Earth transmissions. But the younger officer wasn't so sure. He had studied the collapse-era records. The descriptions of human engineering matched perfectly: dense reactors, efficient designs, and untraceable communication codes. The fleet they were looking at wasn't ancient. It was new, rebuilt, and it was human. The Admiral ordered another communication attempt, but the humans didn't respond. Instead, they slowly adjusted their formation, revealing that their weapons were still powered but not aimed. It was a silent message. "We could destroy you, but we choose not to." The coalition ships, once confident and arrogant, now hesitated. The Admiral knew that if those vessels could disable a cruiser with one shot, they could easily destroy the rest of his fleet. But pride made him hesitate. He didn't want to retreat before what looked like a small, outdated fleet. On the observation station, officers argued among themselves. Some insisted they should send reinforcements immediately. Others believed they should open peaceful communication. The argument didn't matter. The humans had already proven their capability. Then, in an unexpected move, the human flagship transmitted one final message. Clear and direct. "Do not mistake restraint for weakness. We seek passage, not war." After that, the human ships powered down their weapons and continued their steady course. The coalition fleet held position, too afraid to attack again, too proud to apologize. As the small formation passed into open space, silence filled the channel. The Admiral ordered his fleet to stand down and return to base. No one spoke on the way back. The crew knew they had witnessed something historic. When the report reached high command, officials refused to believe it. They laughed, saying it was impossible. "Humans are gone," one senator said. "You've been fooled by ghost ships." But the data didn't lie. The energy readings, the hull designs, and the language patterns all pointed to one conclusion: humanity had returned. The young officer who first noticed the signal sat alone that night, replaying the encounter in his mind. The humans hadn't attacked first. They had waited, watched, and only responded after being provoked. Their precision wasn't born from aggression, it was born from discipline. That realization stayed with him. He wondered how many other ancient truths the galaxy had buried under arrogance and pride. How many warnings had been ignored because they came from voices no one respected. The galaxy had changed while humans were gone, but so, it seemed, had humanity. Days later, deep within the Coalition's intelligence network, hidden files began circulating among high-ranking officials. Classified recordings, old diplomatic logs, and fragments of human history, long thought erased. Some showed moments of alliance, others of war. One detail was constant. Humans were always underestimated until it was too late. And now, a small fleet, barely a dozen ships, had reminded the galaxy why the name human had once carried both respect and fear. The patrol officers who had mocked the strange fleet would never laugh again. They had seen firsthand what a small human force could do. The young officer wrote his final report carefully. He didn't dramatize anything. He simply ended with one quiet line. If this is their small fleet, then the galaxy should pray they never send a large one. He looked out the viewport, watching the distant stars. Somewhere out there, that small human fleet was still moving, silent, disciplined, unstoppable, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt something it hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet fear that humanity was coming home. The next morning, the entire Galactic Coalition was buzzing with rumors. What happened near the border zone had spread faster than anyone expected. Some called it a technical glitch, others claimed it was a hoax. But those who were there, the ones who saw the small fleet disable a massive cruiser in seconds, they knew it was real. In the Coalition's High Command Center, a meeting was called. Generals, admirals, and ministers filled the large circular hall, their faces tense and uncertain. The report from the border fleet played on the big screen. A cluster of small ships moving in formation, responding with a single, precise strike. Then came the voice transmission, the one word that changed everything. Human. That word echoed in the chamber like thunder. For centuries, humanity had been nothing more than a ghost in history books, a legend told to cadets about an extinct race that burned itself out in ancient wars. No one had ever believed they'd return. And yet here they were. The admiral who led the patrol stood in the center of the room, his voice uneasy. "They didn't destroy us," he said quietly. "They could have. But they didn't," the council murmured in disbelief. "You expect us to believe a handful of outdated ships outmaneuvered a coalition patrol?" One minister snapped. "They weren't outdated," the admiral replied. "They were efficient. Every shot was deliberate. Every move was planned. They weren't testing us, they were warning us." No one liked hearing that. The coalition had ruled this part of the galaxy for generations. They were used to being the strongest, the most advanced, the most feared. To admit that a small fleet, especially one belonging to a lost human civilization, could overpower them was unthinkable. But denial couldn't change the data. The recordings didn't lie. While the council argued far away near the border, the human fleet continued on its quiet path through deep space. Inside the lead ship, the crew worked calmly, without celebration or fear. They didn't see themselves as victors. They were explorers, not conquerors. The battle wasn't what they wanted. It was what they had to do to protect their own. The human commander stood at the viewport, watching the stars drift by. The silence of space had always felt comforting. For generations, humans had traveled in the dark, building colonies beyond the reach of the old galaxy. They had rebuilt, adapted, and survived without anyone's help. Now they were coming home, not to rule, but to reclaim the truth of who they were. Meanwhile, the coalition sent more patrols to monitor them from a distance. None dared to approach. Every time they got too close, the human ships subtly adjusted their formation, just enough to remind them they were being watched too. The message was clear. "We see you. Stay where you are." Back at the coalition's academy, younger officers began whispering about the humans. Some saw them as a threat, others as a mystery. Stories spread fast. How the old Earth fleets were said to fight like living machines. How they could improvise faster than any AI. Some called it instinct. Others called it madness. But to one officer, the same young man who first noticed the strange signal, it was something else entirely. He didn't see monsters or myths. He saw proof that humanity had endured. Against all odds, they had survived extinction and come back stronger. That realization filled him with quiet respect. Days later, the coalition decided to send another fleet. Not to attack, but to make contact again. This time they came prepared. Larger ships, more translators, and a team of diplomats were sent aboard. They were determined not to repeat the mistake of the first encounter. When the fleets met again, the stars around them shimmered with tension. The coalition admiral spoke first. His voice was firm but careful. "Unknown vessels, this is the Galactic Coalition. We wish to establish peaceful contact." For a long moment, nothing happened. The human fleet remained silent. Then a single reply came through. It was brief, calm, and carried the same unshakable confidence as before. "Peace is welcome, but your first contact began with gunfire. We will not repeat that mistake." The coalition officers exchanged nervous looks. The humans weren't being aggressive, they were just stating facts. That made it even harder to argue. The admiral tried again. "We regret the misunderstanding. We didn't know who you were." The reply came almost instantly. "Now you do." The human ships didn't move closer, but one of their smaller vessels broke formation and drifted forward slowly. A soft light pulsed from its hull, an ancient gesture of peaceful intent used before universal translation existed. The coalition admiral ordered his ships to stand down weapons and match the signal. The human vessel stopped at a safe distance. No hologram, no face appeared, just a voice. "We are the United Earth Defense Command. We are returning from deep space exploration. We seek no war, only safe passage." The admiral nodded, trying to sound calm. "You have it, but if I may ask, where have you been all these years?" The galaxy thought humanity was gone. There was silence. Then the voice spoke again, quieter this time. "Gone is not the same as forgotten. We went where no one else dared to go. We learned, we built, and we came back." The transmission ended. The human fleet turned away, moving farther into the sector. The coalition ships didn't follow. They simply watched, their sensors recording every move. In the coalition capital, panic started to grow. Civilian news networks caught wind of the event, and headlines exploded overnight. Extinct species returns. Human fleet sighted. Old myths come alive. Some were fascinated, others afraid. Politicians debated whether to welcome or contain them. Military leaders warned that if humans had rebuilt, they might have more fleets, bigger ones, hidden somewhere beyond the rim. But the truth was simpler. The humans weren't invading. They were just returning home. Across the galaxy, smaller civilizations, ones often bullied by the coalition, heard the news with hope. Many remembered the stories of the early humans who had once fought for equality and independence. To them, humanity's return meant balance might finally return to the stars. On the other side of the conflict, the coalition's propaganda networks tried to twist the story. They called the humans dangerous, unpredictable, and unstable. But the recordings from the battle told a different tale, one where the coalition fired first and the humans responded with restraint. That truth couldn't be hidden for long. Inside the human flagship, the crew analyzed the coalition's communications. They understood exactly how the other side was reacting, but they didn't care about politics. They had no interest in ruling or proving themselves. Their mission was to prepare a safe path for the rest of humanity to follow. Late into the cycle, the human commander stood in the observation deck again. His second-in-command approached quietly. "They're afraid of us," she said softly. He nodded. "Fear is natural, but it's better than hatred." "What if they attack again?" she asked. He looked out into the endless stars. "Then we remind them why they shouldn't." His tone wasn't angry. It was weary, calm, and certain. These were not conquerors. These were survivors who had already seen what war could do. They didn't want to destroy. They wanted to exist without being hunted. As the days passed, the coalition began tracking more human transmissions, encrypted, disciplined, and spreading through deep space routes no one had used in centuries. It became clear that this small fleet wasn't alone. They were the vanguard, the first wave of something larger, something organized. The young coalition officer who had noticed the first signal spent long nights studying the data. He noticed patterns, routes that suggested hidden bases or colonies far beyond known maps. The more he studied, the more he realized how vast humanity's reach had quietly become. They hadn't been sleeping for centuries. They'd been growing. He wondered what kind of people these humans were now. Were they peaceful explorers? Or warriors waiting for the right moment? He didn't know. But deep down he hoped they were more than what history had painted them to be. One night, unable to sleep, he looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the small human fleet was still moving. Their message echoed in his mind. "We seek no war, only passage." He believed them. He wanted to. But he also knew the coalition wouldn't rest easily. Pride had always been their weakness. They would test humanity again, and next time the humans might not be so forgiving. For now the galaxy was silent. The humans had come, spoken, and left. Yet their presence lingered like a quiet storm waiting beyond the horizon. Everyone knew what that silence meant. The coalition had seen their power. They had witnessed restraint stronger than any weapon. And even those who mocked them in the beginning now whispered in fear. Because deep down they all understood one simple truth. If that was humanity's small fleet, then the galaxy hadn't seen anything yet. The coalition command centers across multiple systems were in chaos. Reports about the human fleet had spread far beyond control. Every official tried to give their own version of the story. Some called it a peaceful contact. Others called it a potential threat. The truth was somewhere in between, and that made it even more dangerous. In one of the main strategy halls, a heated debate went on for hours. Admirals shouted over each other, throwing holographic maps across the table. The recordings of the first encounter played again and again, each time showing the same thing: a few human ships disabling a cruiser in a single clean strike. The more they watched, the more they realized how little they understood about these humans. One general slammed his fist on the table. "They humiliated us. They fired first, they broke our authority." An older advisor shook his head. "No, they didn't. We fired first. They only defended themselves." The room went silent for a moment. No one liked hearing that truth. The Coalition had always believed itself to be the galaxy's peacekeeper, the most advanced, most disciplined force in known space. But now their pride had taken a blow that wouldn't heal easily. Outside the war room, young officers whispered in corridors. They'd heard the rumors too, stories about how those small human ships fought like nothing they'd ever seen. Fast, coordinated, almost alive. Some thought it was just luck. Others said the humans had been training for this moment for centuries. Meanwhile, in a quiet control room on a distant outpost, the young officer who first detected the human signal sat at his console, reviewing fresh data. The small human fleet was still moving through space, slow and steady, never deviating from its course. Coalition surveillance ships followed at a distance, careful not to provoke them again. The young officer zoomed in on one of the ships and noticed something strange. The vessels looked old, yet every movement was flawless. They didn't waste energy or time. Every turn, every power fluctuation, every signal, they all had a purpose. It wasn't just engineering. It was discipline. As the days passed, more ships were sent to shadow the human fleet. They kept their distance, scanning from afar. Every time they tried to approach, the humans would subtly change position, forcing them to back off. It was as if the humans could predict their moves before they even made them. Inside the Coalition Council, fear began to take root, though no one wanted to admit it. The leaders were used to being feared by others, not the other way around. Now they sat in private chambers whispering the one question no one dared to say aloud. If this is their small fleet, what happens if the humans bring more? To maintain control, the Coalition's media networks began broadcasting official messages. They painted the humans as rogue explorers or remnants of a failed species. They said the Coalition had everything under control. But deep down, people knew the truth. Soldiers who had been in the first encounter told their own stories in quiet bars and underground channels. They spoke about how calm the human voice had been during the battle, how there was no shouting, no threats, just quiet precision. That calmness frightened them more than anger ever could. In the outer colonies, smaller races who had long suffered under the Coalition's rule began whispering something new. Hope. They remembered the ancient tales, the ones about how humans once stood against tyranny, how they fought even when outnumbered. Now those stories no longer felt like myths. But not everyone saw the humans as heroes. Some Coalition generals were already planning a second confrontation. They believed that if they struck now, they could crush this small fleet before it became a real threat. They convinced themselves that humans were bluffing, that their technology couldn't possibly rival the Coalition's. Within days, a larger task force was assembled, 20 warships, heavily armed, sent under the excuse of ensuring border security. But everyone knew the real reason. They wanted revenge. When the new fleet approached, the human ships detected them instantly. Inside the human flagship, the commander watched the incoming readings with calm eyes. He gave no orders to flee, no commands to arm weapons. His crew knew exactly what to do without being told. They'd faced worse before. The Coalition fleet arrived in formation, engines blazing, weapons charged. The admiral in charge opened a channel and spoke with forced confidence. Unidentified human vessels, this is a restricted sector. You are hereby ordered to halt and submit to inspection. The humans didn't respond. The silence dragged on for several seconds, heavy and cold. Then finally a voice came through. It was the same calm tone as before, neither angry nor afraid. We warned you once. Do not test us again. The admiral clenched his jaw. You are trespassing in Coalition space. You will comply or we will take action. No answer. Fire a warning shot, the admiral ordered. A pulse beam streaked across the darkness and exploded harmlessly near the human fleet. Still, the humans didn't move. They held formation, shields glowing faintly like blue halos. The admiral grew impatient. Fire again, this time closer. The second shot flew, and before it could even finish, the human ships moved. Not in chaos, not in panic. They moved as one. Every ship broke formation for just 2 seconds, changing angles with perfect timing. The next instant, beams of white light cut through space, too fast to track. In the Coalition fleet, alarms erupted everywhere. One warship after another began losing power. Engines died, weapons shut down. No explosions, no debris, just silence. Within minutes, half of the Coalition's task force was disabled. The human commander's voice returned to the open channel. You are alive because we choose for you to be. Do not follow us again. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the human fleet powered down their weapons and resumed their slow, steady course through the stars. The surviving coalition ships floated helplessly, their systems struggling to restart. The admiral sat in stunned silence, realizing what had just happened. 20 warships, the pride of the coalition navy, had been rendered useless by a dozen human vessels that didn't even break formation. Back in the coalition capital, the defeat hit like an earthquake. The council tried to hide it, but the story spread anyway. Engineers analyzed the battle data in disbelief. The human weapons weren't plasma or laser. They were something else entirely. The readings showed raw kinetic energy compressed into unimaginable force. Old-fashioned projectile weaponry, but perfected beyond anything known. The scientists couldn't understand how something so primitive could bypass modern shields. But that was the irony. The humans had evolved past the galaxy's expectations by going back to simplicity and perfecting it. Where others relied on automated systems, the humans relied on human instinct, fast, unpredictable, and efficient. Soon, the mockery stopped. The laughter faded. The same officers who once joked about the small fleet now spoke their name with quiet respect, or fear. Across the galaxy, the phrase human fleet began to spread. Not through official reports, but through whispers. Every race, every commander, every trader who heard the story felt the same chill. Because they all knew that a species capable of such control, such restraint, and such precision was not to be taken lightly. In the following days, the coalition sent diplomatic messages again, hoping to calm the situation. They claimed it was all a misunderstanding, but the humans didn't respond. They didn't threaten, didn't retaliate, didn't even acknowledge the messages. They simply disappeared from radar. It was as if the small fleet had vanished into deep space again. For the young officer who had been following them since the beginning, it felt strange. He had spent weeks watching those ships, feeling a strange connection to them. Now they were gone, leaving only silence behind. Yet deep down he knew this wasn't the end. The humans hadn't come this far just to vanish again. He saved the last transmission they sent, the one that said, "You are alive because we choose for you to be." Those words haunted him, not because of the threat, but because of the truth behind them. The humans could have destroyed everything, but they didn't. That kind of control was something the galaxy hadn't seen in centuries. The officer looked out of the observation deck window, watching the stars shimmer quietly. Somewhere out there, humanity was still moving, calm, confident, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. And now, the entire galaxy knew one thing for certain. The small fleet they laughed at had turned into a legend. The laughter had turned into fear, and the name human once again carried the weight it had lost long ago. The coalition fleets were quiet now. For the first time in generations, their massive war machines sat still, their commanders uncertain of what to do. The reports from the border had reached every corner of the galaxy. Everyone had heard the same story. A small fleet of human ships had faced overwhelming odds and walked away without a scratch. But what frightened people most wasn't the victory itself. It was what came after. The humans didn't chase, didn't threaten, didn't demand surrender. They just left. That silence spoke louder than any weapon could. In the following days, the coalition tried to regain control of the situation. Their news networks broadcast reassuring messages, claiming that the humans were an isolated faction, nothing to fear. Yet behind closed doors, meetings stretched deep into the night. Military leaders demanded answers, scientists scrambled to study the battle data, and politicians argued about what to do next. No one could agree. Some wanted peace, others wanted war, and everyone feared that whatever decision they made, the humans had already planned for it. Far away, the human fleet continued its slow journey. To an outside observer, it might have looked calm and routine, but inside those ships, tension lingered. The crews were quiet, not out of fear, but from reflection. They had returned to known space after centuries in the dark, and the first thing they encountered was hostility. In the command deck of the lead vessel, the human commander stood before a wide viewport. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and beautiful. He had expected resistance. He had expected mistrust, but he hadn't expected to be forced into battle so quickly. A communications officer approached him quietly. "No more transmissions from the coalition, sir. They've gone silent. The commander nodded slowly. They're afraid, he said softly. Fear spreads faster than truth. Another officer spoke up. Should we send a response message? Clarify our intentions? He thought for a moment, then shook his head. Not yet. Let them wonder who we are. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. The crew obeyed without question. They trusted him completely. Every man and woman on those ships had grown up hearing stories about the lost homeworld, about Earth. They were descendants of those who fled after the collapse wars, carrying humanity's legacy into the dark. For generations they built, learned, and adapted among the stars. Now they were returning, not to conquer but to reconnect. The commander's voice echoed across the ship as he addressed his crew. We didn't come back for war, he said. We came back to remind them that humanity endures, that we still exist, that we still matter. His words brought quiet strength to the crew. They knew what he meant. The galaxy had forgotten humans, reduced their name to myths and cautionary tales, but now every sensor, every broadcast, every frightened whisper across the stars carried one undeniable truth. Humanity had survived. Meanwhile, in the coalition's capital, the council chambers were filled again. The same leaders who once mocked the small fleet now sat in uneasy silence. Their pride had been broken. They could no longer deny the power or precision of the human ships. An older council member finally spoke. We must open proper communication. If we keep treating them like an enemy, we'll make one. Another slammed his hand on the table. And if they already are? You saw what they did to our fleet. 20 warships disabled in minutes. The argument grew louder until a quiet voice interrupted. It belonged to a scientist who had spent the last few nights studying the humans' battle data. They didn't destroy your ships, she said softly. They could have, but they didn't. That made the room go silent. Everyone turned toward her. They held back, she continued. Their weapons were precise, targeted to disable, not kill. If they wanted to end that battle, they could have wiped out the entire task force in seconds. But they didn't. That's not the behavior of conquerors. It's discipline. The generals didn't like it, but they couldn't argue. Deep down, they knew she was right. So after days of hesitation, the coalition sent a new message to the humans. It was brief, careful, and humble. To the fleet identifying itself as the United Earth Defense Command. We acknowledge past mistakes. We wish to re-establish peaceful contact. Please state your intentions. Hours passed with no response. Then just as the coalition began to think their message had been ignored, the reply came. It was simple, calm, unmistakably human. We seek no war. We seek no territory. We seek only our right to exist, to travel, and to return home. Those words spread across the galaxy like fire. People repeated them everywhere, in crowded spaceports, in government halls, and hidden colonies. It was the first time anyone had heard humans speak in centuries, and the message wasn't of conquest or anger. It was of dignity. On one frontier world, a group of miners huddled around a small transmitter, replaying the message again and again. One of them whispered, "They don't sound like killers." "No," another replied. "They sound tired." Back on the human flagship, the commander listened to the coalition's reaction reports. He knew how the galaxy saw them now. Ghosts from a forgotten past returned with impossible power. He didn't want that image, but he also couldn't change what the humans had become. Centuries of isolation had made them stronger, wiser, more patient. They had built ships that didn't rely on size or numbers, but on strategy and human will. Machines obeyed, but humans decided, and that made all the difference. The commander stood before the window again, his reflection faint in the glass. "They think power defines us," he said quietly to his second officer. "But it's restraint that truly measures strength," she nodded. "And what happens when they test that restraint again?" He gave a faint smile. "Then we remind them what happens when they forget who we are." In the days that followed, smaller races began reaching out to the humans. They sent secret transmissions expressing support and curiosity. Many of them had suffered under coalition dominance for years, and now they saw hope in the humans' return. To them, this wasn't a threat. It was balance. The humans replied politely but cautiously. They weren't ready to form alliances or promises. For now, their goal was simple, to chart a course back toward their old territories, the region where Earth once existed. But that destination sent shockwaves through the Coalition's intelligence network. Earth had long been classified as a restricted zone. The Coalition had claimed that area centuries ago, building research outposts and resource stations. Now humanity was coming back to reclaim what was theirs. The Coalition couldn't admit that publicly. Instead, they called it a misunderstanding. They tried to open more talks, even offered joint exploration rights. The humans refused. They didn't argue or threaten. They just sent a single reply. Home is not for negotiation. That single sentence broke through every lie the Coalition had built. It showed the truth in a way no weapon could. The humans weren't chasing power. They were chasing belonging. For the young officer who had been watching this entire story unfold from the observation station, that message hit hard. He'd grown up believing humans were extinct, another tragic lesson from history. But now, as he listened to their calm voices, he realized they were more alive than anyone else. They had been broken once, and instead of disappearing, they rebuilt themselves. Late one night, he sat alone by the observation window, staring at the faint light of distant stars. Somewhere out there, that small human fleet was moving through space, quiet, disciplined, unshakable. He whispered to himself, "They just wanted peace." And we greeted them with guns. He felt shame but also respect, because the humans hadn't come to take revenge. They had simply shown the galaxy that survival could be an act of strength, not aggression. In the Coalition's upper chambers, things began to shift. Some leaders quietly stepped down, realizing they couldn't command a war they didn't understand. Others, more prideful, planned to continue pushing back. They didn't realize that every attempt to intimidate humanity only made them look weaker. The humans didn't need to shout. They didn't need to boast. Their silence spoke enough. And so as the small fleet traveled deeper toward the core systems, their purpose became clear to everyone watching. They weren't an army. They were a message, a reminder to the galaxy that the human spirit, once dismissed as extinct, still burned, calm, patient, and unstoppable somewhere. A frightened Coalition officer summarized it best when he said, "They came not to rule, but to remind us that humanity endures." And across the stars, that truth began to sink in. The ones who were once ridiculed, underestimated, and forgotten had returned, not with vengeance, but with quiet, undeniable strength. The galaxy would never laugh at the small fleet again. The galaxy didn't know what to think anymore. For centuries, humans had been spoken of like ghosts, a lost race that once burned too brightly and vanished in its own fire. But now that ghost had come back, alive and real, moving quietly across the stars, and every step they took shook the balance of power. The Coalition's fleet still circled their borders, nervous and uncertain. They had more ships, more numbers, more resources, but none of it mattered now. They had seen what human ships could do. Every admiral remembered that battle. Every crew whispered the same truth. The humans could have destroyed them, but didn't. That mercy scared them more than any weapon. In the quiet corridors of the human flagship, the atmosphere was calm but heavy. The crew worked with steady precision, each motion purposeful. They had stopped near an uninhabited system, a temporary rest before the long journey home. The commander stood alone in the observation deck, watching a pale blue planet below. It reminded him faintly of Earth, though he had never seen it himself. None of them had. Their stories of Earth came from old recordings and worn-out archives. Stories passed down through families who had once walked under real sunlight. He placed his hand on the glass, looking at the reflection of stars. "After all this time," he whispered, "we're almost home." A quiet voice behind him replied, "If they let us reach it." It was his second officer, standing just out of the light. Her expression was calm, but her words carried concern. "They'll try to stop us," she said. "You know that." "I know," he answered softly. "But we're not here to fight. Not unless they make us." Down in the communications center, a series of alerts began flashing. Coalition frequencies. Dozens of them. Messages, scans, requests. "Commander," said the comms officer, "we're being hailed by multiple Coalition fleets. They want a meeting." He nodded slowly. "Let's hear it." Moments later, the main screen came alive with faces. Alien leaders, admirals, politicians. Their expressions mixed fear and pride, authority and confusion. One of them spoke sharply, trying to sound in control. "Human fleet, you are entering restricted sectors. Turn back immediately. These systems are under coalition protection. The commander didn't flinch. His tone was calm, measured. Protection from what? The alien paused, unprepared for the question. These territories are under research control. Unauthorized passage violates what? The commander interrupted, his voice still steady. These coordinates once belonged to Earth's colonies. They are not yours to claim. Silence followed. None of them dared to respond. Everyone in that call knew it was true. The coalition had taken over abandoned human space centuries ago, exploiting what was left behind. Another admiral finally spoke, his voice quieter. You cannot change history, human. The galaxy has moved on. The commander gave a faint, sad smile. We never wanted to change history. We only want to remember it. The screen went dark. The message had been sent, not through threats but through conviction. Later that night in the crew quarters, quiet conversations filled the air. Some were hopeful. Others were afraid. They had all trained for this moment, to return home, but none of them knew what they would find when they got there. One young officer looked up at the ceiling and said softly, "Do you think Earth still exists?" An engineer sitting nearby smiled faintly. "Even if it doesn't, it lives in us. That's enough." The words spread like warmth through the room. It wasn't just about finding a planet anymore. It was about proving that their people still mattered, that humanity's story wasn't over. Meanwhile, in the coalition capital, chaos brewed behind closed doors. The council was split. Half wanted peace, to let the humans pass and avoid provoking them. The other half demanded military action. "They are trespassing," one council member shouted. "If we allow this, we lose authority over half the galaxy." "Authority?" Another replied bitterly. "You mean the same authority that failed to stop them with 100 warships?" The argument went nowhere. Every hour they delayed, the human fleet moved closer. In the end, fear won. A massive coalition armada was deployed to intercept the humans, the largest gathering of ships in decades. They called it Operation Stability. The true purpose was intimidation. When human scanners picked up the incoming fleet, there was no panic. Just preparation. The crew worked silently, stations glowing with cool light. The second officer walked up beside the commander. 30,000 ships, she said quietly. All pointed at us. The commander looked out at the stars. Let's hope they came to talk. But deep down he knew the truth. Pride had always been the galaxy's greatest weakness. And when pride met fear, war usually followed. Hours later, the first transmission came through. It was the coalition admiral, a stern, silver-scaled being with cold eyes. "You were warned," he said. "Turn back now or we will engage." The human commander's voice remained calm. "We came to go home, not to fight. But if you block our path, we will defend ourselves." The admiral smirked. "You're outnumbered. One fleet against 30,000. The commander paused. "Then I hope you understand mercy better than your predecessors did." The screen flickered off. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, without warning, the coalition armada moved. Dozens of ships launched probes and energy locks, scanning the humans' formation. "Defensive grid online," the human officer reported. "Shields active. No one wanted to fire first." The standoff stretched on, minute after tense minute, until a coalition captain, nervous and impatient, made the mistake everyone feared. One shot. A single pulse of plasma. It didn't hit. The human ship dodged effortlessly like a shadow in the stars. And before the coalition could react, the humans responded, not with destruction but with control. A wave of electromagnetic interference rippled through the enemy formation. One by one, their targeting systems went dark. Engines froze. Weapons shut down. Within seconds, the entire armada was paralyzed. On the human bridge, the commander gave a quiet order. "Hold fire. No casualties." He turned toward his crew, his expression unreadable. "Show them what restraint means." The human sent a signal to every disabled ship, a simple message encoded in every known language. "We are not your enemies. We only seek our home. Let us pass." The coalition ships drifted helplessly, their crews staring in disbelief. They had been rendered powerless, yet not a single human weapon had fired a lethal shot. When power finally returned to the fleet, the admiral's voice came through again, shaken, no longer confident. "You could have destroyed us," he said quietly. "Yes," the human commander replied, But that's not why we came. The connection ended there. No more threats followed. Slowly, one by one, the coalition ships began to withdraw. News of the encounter spread like wildfire. For the first time in galactic memory, an entire fleet had stood down. Not because they were defeated, but because they understood. Across the galaxy, whispers grew louder. People spoke of the human calm, the discipline that turned potential wars into lessons. Some races began to see the humans as something greater than warriors, as symbols of endurance, as proof that even in a cold universe, compassion and strength could exist together. Back on the flagship, the crew finally allowed themselves to breathe. Relief swept through the halls. The commander stood silently, watching the retreating fleets fade from the radar. His second officer approached. "We did it," she said quietly. He nodded. "No, we survived. There's still more to do." He turned to the stars ahead. "Set course for the Sol system." The word sent a ripple through the crew. The Sol system, Earth's cradle, their final destination. Engines hummed to life. The stars stretched into streaks of light as the fleet jumped forward. Every heart on board beat with the same thought. After centuries of wandering, humanity was finally going home. But far behind them, in secret council meetings and intercepted transmissions, the coalition was not done. Not everyone accepted this peace. Some still saw humanity as a threat, something too powerful to be left alone. Plans began to form in the shadows. While the human fleet pushed onward, unaware, their journey was being watched by eyes filled with fear and envy. The story was far from over, because in every age, power draws both admiration and danger, and as the humans closed in on their long-lost world, forces were already gathering, determined to stop them from ever reaching it. The stars had never looked this peaceful. The human fleet moved silently through the blackness, their engines glowing faint blue against the dark. Ahead of them lay the Sol system, the birthplace of humanity, their lost home. No one spoke much now. Every person on board could feel the weight of what was coming. Generations of waiting, centuries of wandering, all leading to this moment. In the command deck of the flagship, the crew sat in quiet focus. The commander stood near the front window, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the faint glow of a distant sun. "Is that it?" whispered one of the younger officers. The navigation officer nodded softly. "Yes, that's our sun." A wave of emotion filled the room. Some smiled, others fought back tears. It was hard to believe that the small, ordinary star shining ahead was the one that had once nurtured billions of lives. The commander spoke in a low voice, almost to himself. "Home, after all this time." The fleet slowed its engines as it neared the outer edges of the system. Scanners began lighting up with faint signals. Artificial satellites, derelict stations, fragments of what once had been. "Detecting debris fields," the science officer reported. "Old structures, centuries old, radiation traces minimal." The commander nodded slowly. So it wasn't completely gone. The fleet divided into groups, spreading out to scan the nearby planets. Every world they passed felt heavy with memory. Mars, cold and quiet. Jupiter, surrounded by fading stations. The asteroid belt littered with wreckage, and then finally the third planet appeared. Blue, white, green, Earth. The crew gasped. Some stood from their seats without realizing it. No one could look away. The planet wasn't exactly how the old records described it. There were scars, strange cloud patterns, and parts of the surface looked darker than before. But it was still alive. The commander stepped closer to the glass, his reflection shimmering over the image of Earth. For a long moment he said nothing. Then in a quiet voice filled with awe he spoke. "Begin approach." The ships moved slowly, carefully, descending toward the orbit once filled with human satellites. As they passed through the upper atmosphere, the sensors caught something unexpected. Faint transmissions. "Are those signals?" asked one officer in disbelief. "Confirming," replied another. "Weak, but they're human frequencies. Automated distress loops centuries old, and one live beacon." Everyone froze. The commander turned sharply. "A live beacon? From where?" "Surface, sir." "Near the equator." Old coordinates, matching the ruins of an ancient city. The bridge fell silent again. Then the commander said, "Prepare a landing team." When the landing craft broke through the atmosphere, the sight that met them was breathtaking and haunting at once. The land below was wild, overgrown with vast forests and rivers that had reclaimed cities. Towers lay in ruins, their metal frames wrapped in green vines. Nature had taken back what humanity had once built. The ship touched down near what was once a major city, now just scattered bones of steel and concrete. The air was clean, rich with oxygen. The crew stepped out slowly, their boots crunching against ancient stone and dust. One of them knelt down, picking up a small, rusted object. It was a metal plaque, half buried in soil. The words were faint, but they could still be read. United Nations Headquarters. The crew exchanged glances, none able to speak. They were standing in the ruins of humanity's old center of peace, the place where their ancestors once tried to unite the world. As they moved deeper into the ruins, they found something else, a small structure still powered by a faint energy field. Inside, a single beacon pulsed with blue light. "This is the signal," said the technician, approaching the beacon's console. "Can you play it?" the commander asked quietly. The technician nodded and activated the device. Static filled the air for a moment, then a voice spoke, old, weak, but unmistakably human. "To whoever finds this, we failed to keep it alive, but maybe one day someone will come back. If you do, don't repeat our mistakes. Remember who we were," the message ended. The silence afterward felt heavy. No one moved for a long time. The commander looked at the small glowing beacon, the last voice of Earth. He placed his hand gently on the console. "We came back," he whispered. The team stayed there for hours, recording data, collecting fragments, and paying silent respect to the people who had come before them. When they returned to orbit, the rest of the fleet was waiting. Every ship received the recording. It played across all decks. And for the first time since leaving their hidden colonies, the entire fleet cried. They hadn't just come home to find a planet. They had found their history. Days passed as the humans explored more of Earth. They discovered small automated outposts still running, machines that had kept the planet stable for centuries. The atmosphere was breathable, the oceans clean, the land recovering. The Earth, it seemed, had healed itself, but peace never stayed long. The coalition knew what was happening. Their surveillance networks had already picked up the humans' arrival. And for some of them, this was the moment they had feared most. In a secret chamber light years away, several high-ranking officials watched the footage of the human ships orbiting Earth. "They found it," one of them said bitterly. "They found their home." Another replied, "If they claim that world, it will inspire every suppressed colony to rise. Humanity's story will spread again." "Then we can't allow it," said the first. "Prepare the fleets." Within days, massive coalition forces began moving toward Sol. Back on the human flagship, the crew was already detecting the movement. The commander gathered his officers. "They're coming," said the navigation officer. Hundreds of ships. The commander's expression was calm, but his eyes were filled with determination. "Then this time we make sure they understand." The fleet moved into a defensive formation around Earth. For hours, space was silent. And then, the stars shifted. The enemy had arrived. Coalition ships surrounded the system, stretching across the dark like a wall of fire. The transmission came quickly. "You have no claim to this world. Leave it or we will remove you." The commander stood tall, his voice steady and clear. "You can't remove what already belongs here. This is our home. We were born here. We bled for it. We will not leave." The opposing fleet gave no answer. Engines flared and then silence. For a moment it seemed they might attack. But before any shot was fired, something extraordinary happened. Across every channel, across every frequency, transmissions began to flood in. Not from the humans, not from the coalition, but from other worlds. Small colonies, trade stations, neutral systems, all of them speaking up. Let them be. They have the right to return. Humanity has earned its place. The entire galaxy was watching. The coalition realized it wasn't just facing a small fleet anymore. It was facing the weight of every free voice in the stars. The commander watched quietly as the enemy fleets began to falter. Orders came and went, confusion spreading among their ranks. No one wanted to start a war the galaxy didn't support, and then one by one the enemy ships began to withdraw. The humans didn't celebrate. They simply watched, silent and steady, until the last hostile signal disappeared. When it was over, the commander spoke softly. "It's done. No one will take this from us again." The crew looked out at Earth shining below them, its oceans reflecting the light of the sun. For the first time in centuries, humanity was home. Days later, they began rebuilding, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as children returning to their mother's embrace. They restored power grids, rebuilt habitats, and planted the first crops in the soil of their ancestors. Slowly, the ruins of the old world began to fill with life again, laughter, music, and the quiet hum of hope. One evening, the commander stood outside watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold, the wind carrying the scent of the sea. A few of the crew stood nearby talking quietly, smiling for the first time in months. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the light warm his face. "We kept the promise," he whispered. "We came back." Above him in orbit, the fleet shimmered against the fading sunlight, a symbol of everything humanity had endured. The galaxy would remember this day, not as a victory of weapons, but as a triumph of will. The small fleet that everyone once ridiculed had done the impossible. They had faced the galaxy, survived its scorn, and found their way home. And now, under the same sun that once shone on their ancestors, humanity began again.